This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Darryl Stephens, co-founder of the Bass Parlour app. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Doing good, doing good. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Well, it's always great to talk to new people, and we're actually, to let people know where we are with this, we're at episode 953 of our podcast. We've been on air since 2016, tracking on Apple Podcast. So that's always cool. They're getting closer to the thousandth episode, 1000. And for those of you just listening, we have your link tree up for Bass Parlour, and that'll be fully clickable. We'll talk about that more. And this episode, we're going to talk about all kinds of things related to music, because everybody knows I'm a music producer and synth head. But what we're going to get into is the topic is how will AI change the music industry? I'm very interested in that because I have my own opinions on where it is, and I use it to a certain extent. But we'll get into that full discussion. But again, welcome to the show, and thank you again for being on the program.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. So I mean, that's a huge topic right there. How will AI change the music industry? We can go in several different directions with that.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to getting started with that question.
Yeah, because one thing, I mean, just being a musician, I mean, I kind of got into a little bit of AI with Roland. They introduced this thing called an intelligent arpeggiator into some of their modern Roland synths, like the Jupiter X and the Juno X.
Right.
And it's still a synth, but it has this capability that it'll actually start writing bass lines and drum lines based on how you play. And I kind of like that use of AI rather than the use of AI that says, let's take Drake's voice and use it on some, Lil Jon's song. I don't know if that's the best use of it, but I know some people are doing things like that rather than, I'd like to use it in a studio and say, hey, why don't I use the same kind of Neve board mix that Fleetwood Mac did on Rumors and put that on my song? I think that's that I can see that as being, that's productive. That's cool. That's using something to help me rather than replacing my writing style.
Yeah, I see both of those being relevant. Be able to mimic different kinds of instruments really well. That's one use of AI. But I also see what I see AI having a huge impact in is songwriters. So, for instance, if I can use Drake's voice, if I can even go back and use, like, I'm a big Curtis Mayfield fan, I'm a big Nina Simone fan, right? And so, as a songwriter, if I can write a song in whatever style I want to write it in, and then I can use Nina Simone's voice, I get part of the publishing rights, so I get part of royalties. Her, she's passed away now, but her family gets part of the publishing rights. And that all be negotiated. But as a songwriter, now the onus is on me. I can write a great song that can connect with people, and I can have a catalog of different, past artists, present artists that I can kind of use their voice on my songwriting, and I can foresee a future where they can lease their voice out for different projects. If they get a huge cut. Obviously, it'll be negotiated, but they would get a huge cut for that. I can see the music industry going in that way. And then the stars would be the songwriters, people who can write a song that connects with the people using whatever voice they want to use, but the song itself is what connects with the people. So I can see it going that way. Another thing I can see is the mixing and mastering of it. So, if I have a recording, and this has all kinds of ramifications. So if I record in, let's say, a bathroom, but with AI, I can take that that dirty recording, and I can clean it up and make it sound pristine. Yeah. Then that has ramifications, because at that point, what is the use of a recording studio? Why would I need a recording studio if I can make a pristine recording no matter where I record from? Because AI can clean it up and make it sound like I recorded in a grade A recording studio. So there's a lot of different ramifications from where AI can do to the music industry. It's scary, but I think it's going to turn every industry is going to turn upside down. But I can see it completely revolutionizing the recording industry.
Well, I think, I'm a synth head, right? I'm a sound designer. And a lot of people, if you go back to the 60s and back to the early 50s, right? Dr. Robert Moog, who created the Moog, got a lot of
Mhm.
resistance from classical musicians and acoustic musicians. And they said, what the heck is this big old Moog thing? It looked like a computer. That's not a musician. That's not an instrument, right?
Right.
And people argued until bands like Sun Ra and Miles
Mhm.
Davis and some of the jazz guys started looking at it. And Herbie Hancock is like, we can use this, right?
Right.
So there's always been an argument, going back to even when Dylan went electric. The folk people said he was a Judas. They like at the big folk festival where he finally went electric. The people argued that he shouldn't do that. So, using technology has always been this big critical point where people say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." And I think the big problem is if you go back to like original hip hop, when they sampled and they didn't credit people, and people
Mhm.
didn't get licensed and they didn't get paid, that to
Right.
me is the problem. Like as long as the original artist or the voice or the person you're using gets the royalties that they deserve and you're not kind of ripping them off, I
Mhm.
think that then the moral issue of it goes away. Then the question is like, how do you use it? Because like the Bomb Squad with samples or De La Soul with samples, they're brilliant. And some
Right.
people used to look at it and say, well, you could be lazy with samples and not do something very well constructed. Then it
Right.
seems like you're kind of not really putting a lot of art into it. Or you can be like the Bomb Squad or De La Soul or any of those great bands that shows that you can be an artist with that. Any
Right.
great DJ you can see that you can be an artist of how you choose in what moment you choose to switch to something or the layering. So it's, you could argue, that, but I just think the licensing and the people making sure they don't like just take somebody's work without crediting them, I think is kind of like,
Yeah.
if
No.
you do plagiarism. It's like that's my
Right.
whole thing. I
And
get that people I can valid argument there.
yeah, no, I agree. I agree completely because I'm a hip hop head. De La was I'm a huge De La fan. I'm a huge Tribe fan. They use a lot of samples too. They use a lot of samples and flipped it really well. Pete Rock, Premier, all they flipped it in a really creative way. But like you said, as long as you give the original creator credit for it, and they get their cut of it, then I think that it's something that can be beneficial, to both parties, the person who's flipping it and the person who originally created it. That's where I see, like when I said with AI, whoever's voice or likeness that I'm using, if I'm a songwriter, whoever's voice and likeness I'm using to actually record, to actually sing the song or perform the song, they have to get a cut of it. Otherwise, you're right. It's just taking their voice, taking their
Yeah,
likeness and not giving them a piece of it. So yeah, I don't agree with that at
yeah, and
all.
they
Yeah,
yeah, and I think you have to give them a right. They even their whoever's owns their catalog, right? Like if they suddenly say, "Well, I don't want John Lennon," like Yoko Ono says, "I don't want John Lennon's voice being used that way," and they tell you
right,
no, cease and desist, then you got
right,
to cease and desist. So
right.
you could do it, but you have to kind of make sure that dot the i's and cross the t's because like if they say they don't want it, they
Mhm.
don't want it. So
Right.
that's where I think that's the artist rights or the who own the masters are gonna have some say in that to a certain extent. But
Right.
as long as you're diplomatic and you work it out, it's how you approach it. Some people
Yeah.
might not approach it in the right way, and then they get hit.
And I even think something different. Like, hip hop, they a lot of producers would just do it. They'll just go get a record, sample it, put it out, and then on the back end, now you got to find the people and give them their cut. What I'm thinking of is a place where on the front end. So on the front end, if it's a artist that's deceased, whoever owns the right to that catalog has to proactively say, I want their voice and likeness to be able to be used in songs on the front end. So then as a songwriter, I can say, okay, let me look through this list of people who are approved and who have,
Hmm.
selected to have
Yeah, yeah.
that voice.
Well,
I
that
can
makes it
only
easier.
select that few. Yeah, it makes it easier on the front end. Otherwise, you know, you're gonna like you said, you're gonna run to a wall where it's like, okay, now I've already used it. Now the song's already gotten big. If it gets big,
Yeah,
now they have all the leverage. I
yeah.
use the voice already. Now they can go and say, I want cease and desist, or I want 95% of the
Well,
proceeds
that's
from
where
this
you get the Ice Ice Baby situation where Queen comes back and says, David Bowie and Queen say, "No, we didn't
song.
tell
Right.
you you could use that."
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
It's like,
Yeah.
"Uh-oh." I guess I messed up on that one.
Uh-huh. And yeah,
But
it's been a lot of
yes,
cases like that. It's been like he that
yeah,
that track was just straight up taken from them. They didn't even try to flip
yeah,
it at
that,
all.
yeah.
It was
Well,
just
that's what
taken
I'm
from
talking about being lazy. Yeah, like because
them.
like if you like I've got I'm kind of crazy, but I use Eurorack analog samplers,
Okay.
and they can go and take a sample and then use controlled voltage to take like an oscillator and then use the oscillator to randomly move it around.
Okay.
And so then if I do something like that and then I run it through all kinds of filters and low pass filters, high pass filters, and I can so much change it so much it's almost totally unrecognizable,
Right.
right? And so that takes a lot. It's kind of like a bomb squad approach of like taking something and turning it into noise, like what you hear on Nation of Millions or something. It's stuff like that, like taking field samples and really radically shifting something. That's like the creative aspect of that type of work or those type of tools. And AI can do that. You go on Chat GPT and you can start randomly putting in things to say, well, I want to feel that sounds like, I'm taking some kind of Shakespearean thing, or I take something from like Citizen Kane, or I do this. You can do all kinds of things that will be kind of wow, that's really weird, abstract,
Right.
rather than it's totally obvious and it's
Hmm.
taking something straight like Ice Ice Baby.
Right. Right. So as a producer yourself, would you feel kind of cheated because you're a purist, like you get really deep and heavy into the sense and how to manipulate it, how to put different filters
Mhm.
on and stuff like that. What if AI? What if with AI, I can do the same thing that you do and take you've studied it for years, different techniques to make it sound exactly how you want it to sound. If I can just tell AI this is how I want it to sound, like you did all this stuff, and I can just play just a regular keyboard with all the bells and whistles that you've studied for years, would you feel kind of cheated as a producer?
I still feel that when I'm working with my modular analog synths, what I've been able to detect, and a lot of purists will to say this, is like if I've got a Hammond B3 or a Mini Moog, and somebody's
Okay.
got a software version of that, right?
Mhm.
If you actually put them on the oscilloscope, they don't sound the same, right?
Right.
It's just almost like if you recorded it on an old Neve board on reel to reel tape, you might think it sounds the same, but if you really check it, it doesn't.
Mhm.
And so the issue is like if when you actually see people, perform, they actually have like a real Juno, or they have a Jupiter, or they have an ARP, or there is a difference. And so
Mhm.
you can get close to it. And so if it's people who don't care about it sounding authentic, but if you want
Mhm.
something to sound like, Stevie Wonder songs in the key of life,
Mhm.
or something to sound like Herbie Hancock, you probably got to use the Hammond and you got to use the Moog. And so you can get close to it, but you won't actually hit it.
Okay. Okay. Even with AI, you still don't think they'll be able to mimic it.
No, it
That
doesn't
exact.
really hit it because it's still digital. It's digital and it's compressed. It's not analog. And analog can get is analog is like old time circuitry. It's not digital. And there's a lot of compression in it. And
Right.
if you
Right.
actually you'll notice that people say, well, I do all this stuff on my DAW, but when they go to the studio and somebody actually has a real Moog, mini Moog, and they put the
Mhm.
bass line on, they actually can hear the difference.
Yeah, I can hear.
And
It's almost like be able to hear the difference between like when I listen to a CD and listen to a record. It's warmer. It's a higher low end. It's more
yeah,
compressed, like you say, all that kind of stuff. What I'm saying with AI, and I might be wrong, we'll see. But I think it might be able to get to the point where it can mimic where you won't be able to tell if it's analog or if it's digital because it can.
it
But you
yeah,
still don't no matter how
yeah.
it gets, it will still won't be able to mimic it.
Well, the problem is like the AI is dealing with totally digital machines. If the
Mhm.
AI is triggering a MIDI on a mini Moog, yeah,
Mhm.
fine. Then it could do it. My
Right.
point is if the AI is triggering a digital synth and a digital oscillator versus a VCO, which is a
Mhm.
voltage controlled old school kind of transistor oscillator, you can hook a MIDI up to an old school VCO and
Right.
AI could trigger that. But if it's a DCO, a digital oscillator,
Mhm.
and it's AI triggering a digital oscillator, it's never going to sound like the VCO. Even if AI is writing the melody, it's not going
Right.
to actually sound right. So theoretically, you could have the AI triggering analog machines. You could
Mhm.
have it trigger, a real piano that's got MIDI hook up to it.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
you've got to actually have that acoustic instrument to actually connect to, or that analog instrument for the AI to trigger. In that situation, you can theoretically have it where, but if it's totally within the digital space, I
Hmm.
think you get the problem with digital is very clean and it's
Hmm.
very perfect. But you'll if you go back and listen to something from the 70s or the 60s or the 50s or even the 20s and the 30s, you'll start to hear the differences.
Yeah,
The modern
yeah,
stuff is super clean, sounds
yeah.
perfect,
It's
but
pristine,
there's
right?
something about that perfect that's not the same as listening to a James Brown 78. It's
Right.
just
I
not.
I agree. I agree with that totally. But what I'm saying is, I think that AI will be able to mimic that. Like our voice is analog, and AI is doing a very good job of mimicking voices. And I know that there's a lot more that goes into mini moog and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm saying is, I agree with you if we're just talking about digital versus analog. But when you're talking about AI that can take all that can digest all of this input. You can feed it what does it sound analog versus digital, and I would think eventually, even if it's not now, eventually they'll be able to mimic the difference between analog and digital, be able to identify that that and put it in an equation and then add that to the music, or add that to the sound rather.
Yeah, it really depends on the quality of the oscillators you're dealing with. There are some
Mhm.
modern digital oscillators that can mimic VCOs. But what
Okay.
they've done is they've created this new technology that actually remaps a digital chip to look like an analog chip, to look
Okay.
like an analog transistor. So there is technology that does that. FGPA is the tech. There's a
Mhm.
bunch of companies like Roland does it. Roland has this thing called FGPA, and it mimics the transistor structures of the Jupiters and the SH101s. And it pretty is pretty close to really being what the Jupiters were.
Right.
But when you still put it against the oscilloscope, it doesn't fully match. So
Okay.
even though it's really close, it
Mhm.
doesn't fully match. Now, eventually, give it another 10 years, they're probably going to get to a total match. But, the one thing that is hard to describe is analog machines have a lot of controls that are on them. And the
Okay.
control is kind of like the sliders or the drawbars on an organ. And so when somebody's playing an organ and they use those drawbars, that's a
Mhm.
human interaction that
Right.
they're using the foot pedals and the drawbars. Synthesizers have tons of controls on them that when you have just a PC and a mouse, they don't have that. And so what happens is the human factor of the musician is kind
Mhm.
of like a person on a Stradivarius. There's
Right.
something about being on that instrument, the human factor is
Mhm.
always going to be better than the machine. I don't care if it's AI or not.
Yeah, I thought the same way until I started looking at some AI artwork. I thought there's a human element that you never can, a human level of creativity that you never can fully capture, that you never can fully mimic, because it goes to depend on how deep you want to get with it, the soul, you know, all of that, like individuality. But when I started seeing some of this AI artwork they created, it was so unique that it's just like how it brings up the question: what is the human element? Can it be mimicked? Can it be copied? Like I know we just talking about in the realm of music for this conversation, but
Mhm.
in art and writing, like the writer's strike going on, people writing script AI with the possibility of writing scripts with a high level of creativity and engagement in the script. It brings a lot of questions to the forefront. Like what does it mean to be human and have creativity?
Well, I think it's something about the random element of human behavior is kind of like what they call the stream of consciousness.
Mhm.
The stream of consciousness, the kind of ability of a guy like Orson Welles when he did Citizen Kane, he didn't really know what he was doing, right?
Right.
If you actually read about when he did that film, he said
Mhm.
the reason that it came out that way is because I didn't know what was wrong. I
Mhm.
did things that people said you're not supposed to do, right?
Right.
But
Right.
this is what happens. So if you're the thing about AI is it learns from anything that has already been done. It takes
Mhm.
pictures from all the pictures that already existed and it randomly moves them around. And it
Right.
makes stuff that looks like it's original, but if you actually trace it, there are actually lawsuits where artists are saying it's actually using their original work,
Mhm.
right? And you might not
Right.
know that it's not fully AI that did it. It's taking somebody else's work that it learned on. So it's
Right.
still the human element that created that original piece, right? And that's the
Right.
problem is like, is the AI gonna know it's using an algorithm, which are rules. Humans break rules.
Right. Right now. But what they're working on is general AI, where the starting point is what was fed to it. But then it can teach itself. It can teach itself new rules. It can teach itself new things. The starting point, you're right, is whatever we feed to it, whatever we program it, that's the starting point. But if that's just a starting point and it can learn on its own from that point, like sky's the limit. Even if we have a starting, even if we give it a starting point, if it can basically reprogram itself to learn, then that's a whole different ball game.
Well, kinda if you get to the, Star Trek Next Generation data level, where you
Uh-huh.
basically have created AI that is duplicating human behavior almost
Mm.
exactly, right? So
Right.
you've got a
Right.
clone of a being, but the problem is no matter what you do with computers, the human mind still has more processing computer power than any mainframe or massive system that's ever been generated or created
Up to this point.
up to this point. And
Right.
they've never seen, even with the AI, that's been exceeded at any level because we don't even use most of our brain. So the
Right.
question is, AI will get very good and it will seem like very close to human creativity. I'm just still not clear on if it can actually be like that data level, science fiction level capability of being a full android and living its own life and having its own purpose and actually acting like an individual.
Well, hope for the sake of us, you're right, man. I hope I hope you're right.
Yeah, I think it's gonna, there's some things they can do, but even with like if you're a writer and you look at ChatGPT and you're like, a classic writer, like you get there like a Rod Serling. You get
Mhm.
to some of the classic writers that have ever written for TV.
Right.
And I've heard some guy I had a chat GPT talk and said, yeah, maybe you could write a Law and Order or a CSI script, but
Mhm.
you might not be able to do something like Curb Your Enthusiasm or comedy
Right.
because it
Right.
has it can do something that's predictable like a crime drama, but
Mhm.
comedy is very unique human
Mhm.
kind of aspect, and I don't know if it can actually do that.
Yeah, we'll see. Only time will tell. But I mean, like I said, for I hope for the sake of us as humans, I hope that you're right, and there's a limit to it. But the more I'm seeing the advancements has been making in the past 5 years, I don't know anymore. I don't know
Mhm.
anymore. Right. And
Yeah, I
by the
mean,
way, Curb Your Enthusiasm is one of my top five favorite comedies of all time, comedy shows of all time. And so,
yeah, yeah, I was just talking to an
oh,
AI, advocate, and he thought comedy would be very hard for it to do,
right,
just because it doesn't have that kind of data mind. Even data couldn't really do comedy. Even next to the idea of it was that was a hard thing for it to figure out because it's not logical, right? And you could
right.
try to learn, but it's kind of very off the cuff, very creative. And whether or not you're just trying to get your own concepts together, I don't know, it's a hard thing to figure out.
It's hard. It would
I
be
mean,
hard to
for
figure out.
all yeah.
Yeah, if we're thinking about from the perspective of you have to understand it in order to be able to write for it. I agree. I don't think that you have to necessarily understand the comedy in order to write for it. I think as AI, they can study, they see what's successful. They can see a script, they can see what's successful, they can see pretty much all the surrounding stats around what worked, what didn't work. They can take in everything about the script, everything about what's written, everything about the timing, everything about the cadence, and then you can duplicate that without even understanding from a individual level why was funny, what was funny about it. All you're doing
Mhm.
is mimicking or writing based on the beats, basically. So I don't know if you have to fully understand comedy or fully understand any specific genre in order to write well for it.
Yeah, I guess it's the point of view is like, could you actually get an AI George Carlson or Richard Pryor?
Yeah,
Is it
yeah,
just gonna try to get the laughs or is it gonna have the perspective? And the perspective is a human thing of like everything that Richard Pryor experienced
mhm,
and lived as that individual,
right,
Richard Pryor. maybe you can do jokes that are like his, but I don't know if you could ever be him as an AI. I still kind of doubtful with that, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
just
we'll
my
see. And Richard Pryor is my favorite comedian. You picking all the greats. You picking all the Kirby Enthusiasm, Richard Pryor. That's all my favorites. But
yeah. I would
I
just
hear what you're
hope that
saying.
the human spark, like that, yeah, you're not gonna really match him. I mean, even people today don't match him.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely not. And George
You know,
Carlin. Yeah, he's a second. He's probably top five. Well, he's definitely top
yeah,
five as far as comedic writing. He's
yeah,
probably top three as far as
yeah.
like
Just
insight and everything like that. But I don't know if you have to. You're right. He talked from his both of them talk, and any good comedian, David Chappelle, anybody else, talks from their perspective and their life lessons and what they've learned and just basically their perspective of being a human being, what they've gone through. But if you don't have a consciousness, if you're AI and you don't have as far as we know, don't have a consciousness, is that really affecting what your perspective and what you can say? Do you have to have a consciousness in order to write, in order to create something that as long as you study it enough or have enough insight into what people think works, what people think doesn't work, what they like, what they don't like. If I can pretty much digest everything in human history, comedy, everything else, I can duplicate that without even understanding. I think, and we'll see. Like we don't know at this point, but you might be right. But
yeah, yeah. I
I think
think
if
the
you
problem is, I think you get kind of like what you see in the industry today in music,
Mhm,
where you see how many people clone Beyonce, how many people clone a group, and you get the numbers. So
right.
this is the problem. I think is like, what is the quality of the music? If you just clone Beyonce or you clone Taylor Swift and you sound like her and you can
Mhm,
have beats that are like her and you can
mhm,
have things and you get the numbers, but does that satisfy you like Carole King? Does that satisfy you like Donna Summer? Does it actually satisfy you as an original artist coming up with a new idea like Sun Ra, who is
right.
very experimental in their jazz? Very hard to kind of say what is the Sun Ra sound. It goes
Mhm.
from bebop to funk to all over the place. It's
All
not
over the
just
place,
one
right.
thing.
Right.
That's where I think AI is going to have a problem of how are you going to be like Prince from going to the Black Album to Purple Rain to this, doing not reinventing himself, or Bowie reinventing, deciding to be the lad and saying Ziggy Stardust, the different characters he came up with. That's the human factor. That why would, unless you have a personality, how are
Mhm.
you going to do that? You could clone that, but would you become the next David Bowie character on your own, just cloning everything humans had already done?
Yeah, but I don't think I understand what you're saying to a sense. But what if I would say two things? One is, what if I can use with AI? I can create a voice like Adele, best voice, one of the best voices I ever heard. Her, Whitney Houston, the best voices that I've ever heard. I can, if I have the money to purchase the best songwriters on earth, and then I can use AI's voice to do it. It's going to connect with the people. I don't necessarily have to create a whole catalog like Prince of great songs. I can just create individual singles using the greatest songwriters on earth and the greatest voices in the history of earth. And that's a combination that's going to be hard to deny. You can't deny it. So I wouldn't approach it if I was in charge of a project like this. I would approach it like, let me try to have all the creativity, all the unpredictability of the great artists like Prince or Radiohead or Outkast, all these groups that are like you don't know where they're coming from. I can just I can use anybody's likeness I want to, anybody's voice, anybody's style, and then I can get the best songwriters on earth to create songs for that style. That's gonna be hard to, and then year after year putting
Well,
out.
it's a yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it's a money making, repetitious formula. But I
Right.
like, again, I'm coming from the perspective of I like artists that are innovators, like the Lou Reeds, the Miles Davises, the people like that. So where are you going to get that if that becomes it's all about that. And even if you look back to those original artists like Sun Ra and Miles Davis, they were willing to do things not just for the money, to
Right.
do it
I
for the
agree.
art. And
Right.
so, yeah, AI will make money. There's no question. The question
Right.
of it is like, do I want to, as a listener, would I really want to listen to that? Probably
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
That is
Maybe not. Maybe
for
not
me,
someone who's
because I was
really like I'm like you. I'm like you. I go deep into music, and my favorite artists weren't the best selling artists, right? So all like the artists I love the most usually weren't the best selling artists. They connected with me for a specific reason, right? Like I'm a huge Curtis Mayfield fan. He's not one of the best selling artists of that genre
yeah,
of that
yeah,
time period, but his music connects with me. So I don't know. You might be right. AI might not be able to mimic that, but what it can mimic are the hits because it can mimic the most popular music, and they can make
it'll
money.
become the new
If I was the
Motown.
owner, yeah, exactly.
It'll
They
become
can
the
make it
Motown hit city.
right, right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
It'll
if
be
you,
a hit factor. It can just be a hit factor. And if you're going to take on that project, if you're not a music purist or a complete music connoisseur, then you just want to make money off of it, like any other
oh
industry,
yeah,
because it comes down to the
it's
money.
like anybody, if you look at the what happens, like if you
Mm,
look at the heavy metal era, like people had, they had Guns N' Roses. That's the pure heavy metal band, like a Def Leppard. Then you have the
right,
ones that are just clones, right?
right,
The ones
right.
that stood the test of time and they're still around, the Def Leppard and the Guns N' Roses,
Mm,
right? Because they actually wrote original stuff. The other ones that
right.
kind of fell out. They might have had hits. So you can be that one hit wonder. You can keep on running those one hit wonders. And there are people that like that. And you can make money doing that. Is it the question of the art of it? Which to me, going back to the whole point of being an artist is, I always have this conversation with artists is we do it because we love it and it happens to do well, that's fine.
Mm,
But a lot of times, like the purest kind of songwriter, we do other things. Like I podcast, I do other things, I do production. But so
right.
it isn't my goal to hit the million seller. That's not my goal. If there's somebody that's what they want to do, that's fine. AI is probably the tool you want to use.
Mm. So there might be always so you might be always a space for human creators, and if you know,
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a generation of people. If you think about like how did Kurt Cobain and Nirvana come through after the age of hair metal? People got tired of the clones.
mm,
And Nirvana showed up on the scene because Kurt didn't care about money. He was coming from Sub Pop. He just wrote the way he felt like it was. You got a synergy with a guy that didn't really care whether he
right,
was making songs that were going to make money. They happened to make money. And this
mm,
is what you get sometimes. And that's a very random element. You get the artist that doesn't really care. Like Prince was one of those.
mm.
He
But
had a chance when he was 17 to have Earth, Wind, and Fire, Maurice White, right? To have him produce the first Prince album. He said no.
mm,
He said no because he wanted to sound like Prince.
you're right, right. That,
That's
that
the
makes but
argument. That's the argument I'm making. He could have gone with Earth, Wind, and Fire and made $1 million on the first Prince record. But he didn't do that. He went
right,
with his own style where he wanted to sound like him. He didn't want to sound like Earth, Wind, and Fire.
right. But
He
now that we
did.
have, I agree, I agree. But now that we have a whole catalog, a whole discography of all Prince music, so we know what Prince sounded like. We know his cadence. We know his style. That can be studied. What if someone just can wrote a brain? And Prince was extremely popular too, so it's not like he was an underground artist. He was extremely popular. Uh, and what if we have a songwriter who can write songs in the vein of Prince, and you can use his voice and his style, guitar playing, and all that kind of stuff. You can have a whole new Prince album. You can have a series of whole new Prince albums,
Yeah,
and you will be able to. And if you are a new generation, if you someone who's born, you can get to a point where if you let them listen to the album that was created by AI and the albums originally created by Prince, unless you live through that time period or you just know this discography like that, I think you get to a point where you won't even be able to tell the difference.
yeah, that could be true. But Prince was so prolific, he actually has like 10 to 15 years worth of unreleased music that we never even heard.
Right.
So
Right.
you wouldn't need to run AI on him because there's original stuff that's never been heard.
True. Yeah, that's true.
So by and being a Prince Purplehead, I would argue that Prince's unique take on things
Mm,
would be hard for AI to actually get to, because if you get to what he does, it was maybe it can do it, but what I've heard from AI so far,
mm.
I've not heard anything capable of doing what he does right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, I agree with that. Not yet. Not yet. I
Not
agree with
yet.
that.
Yeah, maybe he'll get to that, but because yeah, but, but yeah, I mean, AI is the big problem. Is whether or not people use it in the kind of cheating way or lazy
Yeah,
way. Right?
right.
You're talking about writers actually writing new material. My
Mm,
fear is people just clone When Doves Cry and then take somebody else's voice and put it on it and do note for note exactly When Doves Cry with somebody else's voice on it.
yeah, yeah. That would be a
That's
problem.
what I've seen people do so far. And
Right,
so my thing has not been like that they've gone and tried to do something unique.
right. Yeah, it's still in the early stages though. It's still in the early stages, but that's a big thing. The other thing that I think that could be a huge game changer was if AI can clean out the records. If I made a recording, like I said, in a basement or a
Well,
bathroom,
yeah, that
and they can take that would be a huge game changer because then that could make recording studios obsolete, you know,
well
because it
that
would.
goes yeah, that only goes into like if you talk to a recording engineer, they probably try to argue that their point of view on what when they actually listen to every second of a song, they're
Mm,
running it through their remastering, decks of all these analog preamps and all these compressors and all these things. Now, I have a legitimate point of view where AI could do some of that
okay.
because AI can go through all those Neve boards and
Mm,
all those compressors and all those very complicated things that the sound engineers go to Berkeley to learn, that
right.
type of level of stuff. And you could theoretically, like in the beginning of the episode, I said, hey, Fleetwood Mac Rumors went through this famous Neve board, the analog board, and
Mm,
I want that like Stevie Nicks compression on her voice on one of those songs. I want to use that same compression, the same settings on my song, and
right.
use those settings and apply those settings to my song, to my
Mm,
vocal, apply McFleetwood's drum settings to the drums, and apply, Christine McVie's keyboard settings, to the keyboards on my song. And if you could do that, I
mm,
think that's actually very helpful because people could say, I want to use Led Zeppelin 4. I want to use like Sly and the Family Stone record. I want these different mastering styles applied. And I don't think that's exactly cheating. That's actually giving people capability that's so expensive. Those MIDI boards are $300,000, $500,000 boards. You can't
right.
even get that. So
Right.
giving that to more musicians could actually create a whole new era of really awesome music.
Right. No, I agree. I agree, but you're thinking about it from the perspective of a musician who's a true musician who loves the art, right? And so I agree with you from that perspective because you're thinking about ways to incorporate it in a way that's artistic, in a way that's true to being a true musician. But I think there's a whole nother perspective that people who are looking at it as a business opportunity, and they don't care about any of that stuff.
Yeah,
They,
no.
they they're just thinking
Yeah,
about
they
how can
kind
I
of
make
go
the most money with this
yeah, I
and
mean,
get
if you just go for the less artistic point of view is I can take a bathroom recording and make it so clean, but my whole thing is a lot of recording isn't necessarily clean. When you actually get into the dynamics of what you do with engineering,
Mhm.
sometimes you dirty things up. Sometimes you make things
Perfect.
not exactly perfect. There's a lot of what we call the happy accident or imperfections
Mhm.
that are actually necessary to make the thing sound better. Um,
Right,
and
right.
so the obvious thing is to just clean it up and get the white noise out, get the bad echoes out. But there's a whole thing. There was a almost level. People win Grammys for engineering
Mhm.
because there's a certain level of it that is art. and they're
Right.
looking at every second of the record and making choices on all those settings from a
Right.
very artistic point of view. And so to the somebody that had a really bad recording and just cleaned it up, that's just a high level use case. But there's a whole nother level of it that I guess I was going after.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I agree with that. Because a lot of my favorite records have, like you said, having mistakes, things that's not like quantized, or with a band, nothing's quantized, but it has a feeling
Yeah.
of having like a swing and a looseness to it, and
Yeah, the
so
Purdy shuffle. Like,
right,
could somebody do the Purdy shuffle like Purdy? Maybe you can get it, but there's something about, Steely Dan used Purdy, him,
mhm,
like everybody used him. But the idea is like that real Motown drummer or the Stax drummer. That
right,
even the drum machines today, people can't do what those guys did. Those classic, the Funk Brothers and all those guys. If you listen to those Motown records and you listen to the drum lines, it might seem like it sounds simple, but a lot
right,
of it is very intricate and very human. And a
right.
lot of the drum machines and stuff don't do justice to what those real drummers did.
I agree. That's why I'm not a huge fan of '80s music. There were some exceptions, obviously Michael Jackson, Prince. There's some exceptions, but
Yeah,
the
they
'80s
got
music,
creative
when
with the
the drum
Lin.
machine, when the drum machine came in, I was just like, I need that. I need that real feel of a real drummer more than the drum
Well,
machine.
even Prince ended up using real drummers. Like,
Yeah.
he got sick of it. That was a phase. If you actually check the MPG in the end of life, he had tons of drummers, real
Mhm.
live drummers. Um, but his programming on the Lin drum machine and the 808s and 909s, and what it was cool is he was very interested in actually trying to use it in a very musician type way, not
Right.
using it as like just a cheat to keep the beat, but actually be very innovative in his approach. Some
Mhm.
people don't do that. So when you
Yeah.
get guys like Michael and Prince, it's like they like their approach on it, or even like a guy like from Genesis, like Phil Collins, was very
Mhm.
innovative in his use of drum. He's a drummer, and he
He's a
used to
drummer,
use
yeah.
drum machines to
I'm a lead
enhance
singer.
his own drumming. He would add drum machines and still play drums against them,
Right.
but
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting to see where to go. Um, like I said, I hope for our sake, I hope for our sake that you're right. And there's things that AI, no matter how advanced it gets, it won't be able to mimic. I hope that's right. I hope you're right about that.
I think there's always gonna be somebody who wants to go to New Orleans and
Mhm.
listen to a jazz band. There's always gonna be somebody that wants to hear a band that's, like, channeling, like, a Clash or a Talking Heads. Like, if you look at, like, a band like the Talking Heads, how would anybody ever come up with something like Psycho Killers unless they're
Right.
David Byrne? It's like David Byrne had such a weird sensibility. There's no band that's like them even today.
Mhm.
There's certain types of people that there's always gonna be room for that human element. Well, if you go into what's popular and what will make people money, yeah, there's always gonna be that kinda machine driven, we used to call it the corporate rock or the corporate bands,
Mhm.
get created. And AI is gonna be part of that. It's gonna be the record companies trying to, bring themselves back and create this big movement of these like, next thing you know, you'll see these like, fake, well, not fake, but they'll be like, holographic musicians that are not even real people.
Right.
They're
That's
just,
about to ask. That's my next
yeah, you're
question.
holographic AI artist.
Yeah, a completely created artist, look and everything, completely created, and then a hologram. I can see people going to a con because they've in smaller senses they've already done it, but
Well, the
creating.
Gorillas tried to do that. The
Mm,
idea of the Gorillas it was as a comic book though. It was a real band behind it. David Albarn's behind it,
mm,
and the comic book artist was behind it. But they wanted to do holograms. They couldn't get people to pay for it. They think they did a couple of holograms, but they couldn't afford it to keep on doing it with the holograms. So they just
right.
went with the art. But that's a whole concept of a made up band of characters. But
Mhm,
going in the future, a band like the Gorillas could be fully AI holographic.
right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And that could be where it goes. And like you said, a record label they'll be saving a lot of money doing that. We have
Oh yeah.
the AI generated songs, AI band, have a hologram. you get to see keep 100% of the proceeds because it's not a real person you have to split it with. That's something else.
But I think you're always still gonna have the kind of if you look at like Odd Future and Tyler and Earl Sweatshirt and those guys,
Right.
you're always gonna, to me, have that kind of entry point. Like those guys were just on YouTube and they were just running mixtapes and they blew up because they had this sense, Tyler and Earl Sweatshirt and that whole Odd Future collective kind of did a grassroots kind of come up, like the punk
Right.
aesthetic of like the Ramones, the CBGB scene. I think there's always going to be that kind of scene. I'm very much into like the electronic modular scenes that are in Berlin and Finland
Okay.
and uh,
Norway.
Norway, Japan. Like I'm in, I connect with a lot of these underground artists that kind of play like me. And there's
Right.
still a lot of us around in these kind of small scenes. And I think there's always going to be that, like the college radio scene or the underground scene or the mixtape scene. I think you're going to have that because people want that. There's always going to be some kid that wants to rebel and say, I don't like what's on the radio. I want something else,
No, I agree. I don't think that's going to cut out because people are still going to play music. People are still going to write music. So you're still going to have musicians. But in addition to the musicians, I can also see AI musicians. AI creating everything. So you have a choice. You can listen to this, you can listen to this, you can listen to both. So I don't think it's a case where it's either or. But I can see as the AI, let's say the AI musician hologram concerts, as that gets bigger and bigger and more prominent, I can see record labels dumping more money into that because it's less cost. So I'm not saying that
Right,
the artists eliminated.
yeah.
I'm just saying it might
I
be
can
some
see them.
commercial.
Well, I mean, I can see them wanting to bring back Hendrix. I can see Warner Brothers
Yeah,
Reprise saying,
yeah,
"Hey, if we can get AI to reproduce Hendrix and make a hologram of Hendrix and make him do every single performance he ever did, and then put him into stadiums," I can see people doing that with Jim Morrison and the Doors, doing that with
right.
Led Zeppelin. I can see people, but I think there could be a point where people get burned out. I think the problem with the industry, with the corporate, is they do something like that, and
Mhm.
it's big at first, and then eventually people start saying, "Well, it's too much." So I
Right.
think it's a matter of, like, at some point, if they oversaturate or they go too much into it, then there'll be a rebellion, kind of like what happened with grunge.
Yeah.
They'll trigger like another era where people will reject it and go to something that's more honest.
Yeah, but it happens with every genre and every period. People eventually reject the whatever is late. Like you said, like for instance, you're talking about Nirvana replacing kind of glam rock, and eventually with the grunge. But eventually,
Yeah,
grunge got played out too a little bit. There's a lot of people who copycat Nirvana, their whole style. So you had all that going through the early '90s, mid '90s, and then a whole another turn on alternative music came, or rock, whatever you want to call it.
yeah, yeah. It just
Uh,
goes through phases.
went through phases. Went
Yeah,
through
you
phases.
get
So
phases
that's
like disco. I mean, disco had
yeah,
a phase, and then people say they hated it and they wanted to like destroy
right,
it and burn it, and
right.
so, but now like there's a place for a disco in a subgenre. People still like it. It's not
Hmm.
as big as it ever was, but it
Right.
feeds into a lot of what EDM and techno and trance is
Hmm.
that kind of disco mindset. I grew up during disco, and when I see these trance kids and like they're still trying to create that feeling that was in the disco era.
Right.
That's what it's just a new form.
Right.
But I think, yeah, I mean, we're kind of living in an age where there's like everything. I mean, some people channel 1920s flapper stuff. Like we're
Hmm.
in an age where bebop, you know, and fusion can happen at the same time. You got bands they'll channel either all at once, and so Pearl Jam's still here, and they still book
The
massive
tour.
stadiums. They survive.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean, so
Yeah. Now that's one thing I like about this time period in music is there's so many different genres going, and also there's this synchronization of different genres. Like you hear, and then you got the rise of a whole new genres. At least in America, I know like Afro beats is becoming
yeah,
huge.
yeah,
I mean, obviously it's been big in Western Africa for a while, but it's like it's having a huge influence on hip hop, on pop music, on like all kinds of music. So is this
Yeah,
I like to
world
see that.
music always tends to creep over, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
because
for sure.
I mean, like what Prince was getting triggered by Kraftwerk, which was a
Mhm.
Berlin progressive synth band, and he
Yeah.
heard it and he's like, "Oh, I'll integrate that," you know. And so
Hmm.
if you get deep into the Prince, they say, "Wow, he's influenced by Funkadelic, Parliament Funkadelic, Sly and the Family Stone, Hendrix, and this German band." You
Right.
know, so he had many influences, and that's why he's so wide. And what
Yeah.
I like about it today is that, you know, you get country influencing hip hop. You get
Hmm.
psychedelic rock getting infused in different types of trance and EDM and stuff. So there's a lot of cross genre, and that's the opportunity where AI, you know, through Chat GPT, somebody say, well, what happens if I merge a psychedelic song with a Johnny Cash song
Hmm.
and start flipping this, you know, people start saying, well, what about this combination? What about that combination? If you get people to be very inventive with it, I think it's a cool tool to
Yeah.
try to, you know, to slam things together. And hip hop has been doing that forever. We throw jazz and rock and Run DMC was, you know, throwing hard rock and hip hop,
Right.
and De La Soul was psychedelic rock and hip hop, you know.
Hmm.
So we've seen that continually, the influence of jazz. And a lot of hip hop artists actually have real drummers on stage when they play now, you know, and saxophonists and guitar players and everything.
Hmm. Yeah. That's one thing I loved about like I was a big Outkast fan growing up. They use a lot of live instrumentation in their music. That's one thing I loved about them. So yeah, you're right. And
Yeah,
obviously the Roots. There's a lot of other hip hop groups that
yeah, the
that
roots.
use that
Yeah, roots
live
are.
too.
Yeah.
Hmm. So yeah, it's
Well, I think
interesting to
it's
see
really
what.
cool to do that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
But I
I'm
know I
looking
haven't
forward
really
to it.
talked about your app.
Yeah. So the
Your app
bass
based
part.
Parlor, I mean, the whole point. Yeah.
Yeah, the Bass Parlour app. So it's the Bass Parlour app's an app for musicians to connect with other musicians. So like if you're an artist looking for a producer, or like kind of some of the stuff we're talking about. Let's say you're just looking for a whole new genre of musician or artist to collaborate with, you can find that on the Bass Parlour app. So what we're working on is building it to it being a global app. You know, right now, a lot of musicians, I would say 60% of musicians are based in the United States, but it's starting to expand and become much larger all around the world. So that's where we want to go with it is have these mashups and these collaborations from artists and musicians from completely different genres, completely different parts of the world or parts of the country, and just making good music that crosses all different barriers, all different genres, and just uniting. So our slogan is uniting the world through music. So that's what we plan to do is, you can find someone anywhere in the world, collaborate with them, and create brand new music with them.
So through the app, you know, could like just a technical question, like
Mhm.
I have my studio here. I can link it to my mixer and go on to something like StreamYard. And I've actually done collaborations with people using this tool where I've
Okay.
actually, done albums with somebody who lived in California. And we would
Oh,
I
nice.
try something, they try something, then we kind of send files together. Does it have their ability to kind of do that in real time? Because we were using like Google Drive and then live showing each other, like, here's what I just did on my Moog, listen to it because it's coming through my mixer and now you can hear it. And then they go do something on the guitar and they would send each other files and start, playing with it. Is it that kind
Right.
of collaboration?
That will be coming in 2024. So it's funny you mentioned that. So that's coming in 2024. Working on that now. We have a show called the Bass Parlour Mashup, where we put two musicians in the studio together and they create a brand new song from scratch. So that's on our YouTube channel. It's a series. We're working on season 3, and season 3 is the first season where it's remote. So the artists are in two completely separate locations on different sides of the country, and they're coming up with a brand new song. In 2024, in the Bass Parlour rap, you'll be able to actually collaborate with someone in that. So right now, you can find someone, connect with them. Y'all can chat back and forth. You can message each other, and then coming next year, you can actually be able to record with them directly on the app, and then monetize that recording.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
theoretically, I could have my Moog connected to my mixer and then go
Mhm.
through this app. and actually play my Moog bass line real live time while they're on a Gibson Les Paul
Right.
and
Exactly.
do that together in sync. That's the
Do that
idea.
together, think in real time, live right there remotely. So you can do that. You can be able to work with anybody, any other, app member, right there directly, and y'all be able to, interact,
Yeah.
talking to each other back and forth in real time. And so it's gonna, we're really looking forward to it. It's gonna be a game changer.
Yeah, I'll be checking that out because I've done it the hard way where we've kind of I've met people through podcasts, other artists, and we've done albums together,
Right.
and we kind of just kept on sending files back and doing like doing calls through the conference calls and just kind of doing it that way. But having an app that allowed us to like link our mixers together and actually hear stuff real time in sync,
Mhm.
not out of sync. That's something we've been looking for a while. So
Yeah.
that would be cool.
Yeah,
Definitely
absolutely.
be into
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah, we'll stay connected. We'll stay connected for sure. Because I really think that you and
Yeah, I would beta test that. I'd
okay.
volunteer to beta test it.
That's a deal. That's a deal.
Yeah, I did some
Yeah.
beta testing for SoundCloud before
Oh, yeah?
on
Okay.
their mastering. Yeah, yeah. When they were doing their Adobe Labs mastering on SoundCloud, I
Mhm.
did some beta testing for them. But
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's gonna be important. So I will definitely stay connected and and link up because it's gonna be something that me and my team are really, really excited about. It's gonna really change music a lot.
well, yeah, because I heard they used to actually have real life sessions for that, right? Before the pandemic, in your story, you used to have things that you did live with people, like that would kind of like that triggered this app.
Yeah, yeah. So before we used to have, so I used to have a recording studio before the pandemic, and a lot of this stuff would bring in musicians and would have them pair up and create a brand new song right there. They'd never worked with each other before, and we're doing that now again. So we launched the pandemic, shut that down, but I saw the huge need for collaboration and especially independent artists to be able to find
Hmm.
someone work with. A lot of times it's harder for independent artists to find someone to work with. So that's why I decided to kind of pivot and say, okay, instead of the physical location, let me build an app that does the same thing. And that's really been so we hit the ground running. And now we supplementing the app and we're relaunching our in-person, what I call mashups or in-person mashups where we bring in a lot of
Yeah, that's always
musicians from
cool.
the same city. Yeah, and then they can create a brand new song. We give each team 60 minutes to create a brand new song. We pair in musicians from completely different genres and see what they come up with, in 60 minutes. So it's been a lot of great pairings, a lot of great groups, a lot of
Hey,
great songs created from that. So it's been really good.
I'm a believer in stream of consciousness. I mean, that's why I got a bedroom studio because a lot of what I do is like I find that if I just put my multi-track on and I just start jumping on my Moog or my Yamaha piano and
Right.
just record it and without trying to overthink it, and then I
Exactly.
go
Right.
back and I fix it, and I can overdub. So I
Right.
might come up with something, come back to it, and say, "Yeah, I really like the first 15 minutes of this hour-long tape. Gonna splice that out,
Mhm.
start working on it, overdub it, work it out." I've done that type of work with other people, like working with people in California or working Canada and overseas, and having an ability to do that in an app would be fantastic. I know actually a couple of years ago, 2017, I did a record with a lady in Los Angeles, and we were like, "Wow, we wish we had something like what you're talking about,"
Right.
because we
Right.
had to do it like our own way. But
Tell us
yeah,
coming. Tell us
definitely be
coming
cool.
soon. In a few months, it'll be released. So yeah, let them know. It's gonna be really good. I'm really looking forward to it, and I think that the music world is something that needed for a long time, and it's just hold on a few more months and it'll be out there.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show. We kind of have another show coming up, but I want to let people know again. You have your link tree, Bass Parlour. That's really clickable when we're published, and we could have you come on the show again when you're ready to promote that new version of the app.
Okay, sounds
We like
good.
to have people come back, so yeah, if you want to do that, let us know. And thank you again for being on the Family Electric Ghost podcast,
Thank you.
and have a great night.
Absolutely. You too. You too. Thank you, and I appreciate bringing me on, and I look forward to staying connected to you. So take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right. You too. You too.